Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 26th Annual Rose Sheinberg Lecture. I'm Naomi Sunshine, and I'm chair of the Sheinberg Committee. I want to tell you a little bit first about our namesake. Rose Sheinberg is a 1950 graduate of this law school and was a woman ahead of her time in many ways. She was motivated in part to go to law school by Red Scare activities in New York in the 40s. And to honor her memory, her niece and nephew, Jill and Richard Sheinberg, who are here with us this evening, all the way from Utah. Jill and Richard, thank you so much for being here. They set up this committee and lecture series. They are activists in their own right and have always been very strong supporters of this program. Again, we're thrilled you could join us tonight. So as you probably know about the Rose Sheinberg Lecture Series and Committee, we invite a lecturer working at the intersection of race, class, and gender to the law school each year. And as you can see from our brochure, we've had an incredible lineup of speakers over the years. And our introducers, who used to be listed in the brochure, but we ran out of space, have been incredible and accomplished activists in their own right. And I'll tell you about this year's introducer in just a moment. But I want to get back to the other important feature of the Rose Sheinberg Committee, and that is its structure. The committee is student-led, and the students choose the lecturer and do all the work involved in planning the lecture each year. I want to acknowledge and thank our current student members, Will Hughes and Samantha Osaki, our 3 L's, and 2 L's, Lauren Wilfung, Vaden Anthony North, and Samuel Dunkel, who are all here with us. They've put in a lot of work to make this evening happen. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity with a room full of students to do some recruiting. We, each year after the lecture, we start our process of bringing in new 1L students to the committee. So please look out for an email and a docket posting about joining us in this important work. Again, it's a really important feature of our committee that we're student-led, and that was by design. And one of the reasons for that is that we, just like Rose Sheinberg was ahead of her time, we really want our speakers to be timely and to be current, and to really to make sure that we are addressing cutting-edge issues. And I think I know we have really we have done that tonight, so we're really thrilled to have our speaker and introducer here. But I also want to acknowledge the faculty members of the committee, Alina Das, our amazing immigrant rights clinic professor, Liz Chen, a lawyering professor, and last but certainly not least, Sylvia Law, who is the founding chair of our committee and who's been an incredible inspiration all these years. We also have an incredible group of co-sponsoring organizations. I think this is the biggest group of co-sponsoring organizations we've ever had, and it really speaks to the breadth and intersectionality of our lecture this year and to the timeliness of the issues. So we're really happy to have you. And I think we said last year that this was that we had the biggest group of co-sponsoring organizations. So we have even more this year. So we're really thrilled. Again, I mentioned that our speakers have always been amazing, and our introducers are incredible radical and progressive activists in their own right. So I'm thrilled to get to introduce this year's introducer and interlocutor, Juan Cartagena, who is the president and general counsel of Latino Justice, PearlDeaf. Juan is one of the nation's leading voices on equality and non-discrimination. He is a change maker who inspires with words. He is an El Diario columnist, a public speaker, a frequent Huffington Post contributor, a lecturer at Rutgers, and he also inspires with deeds. He is representing immigrants, defending New York's law allowing driver's licenses regardless of immigration status, among many other representations that Latino Justice PearlDeaf takes on. He speaks and writes on topics from the criminalization of immigration to the environmental and human rights degradation due to the military base in Vieques. And he and our speaker have worked together, I think most recently in the wake of the hurricane in Puerto Rico and on getting the Greenpeace ship to come to Puerto Rico and to bring international attention to the plight of Puerto Ricans after the hurricane. So we are so pleased to have you with us tonight, and I will leave it to you to introduce our speaker and take it from there.
Well, good evening. Y buenas noches. I'm going to do a short introduction of Elizabeth Jean-Pierre first, and then we're going to sit down and have a conversation, right? This is an amazing time for me. I'm so happy to be here and to be invited. And after reading about the namesake of the lecture today, this is an amazing opportunity to talk about Rose Scheinberg and her legacy here at NYU. So thank you all for organizing this, and thank you for inviting me. So I guess the first thing you should know very, very quickly, and you're going to hear me say it or exhibit it very soon, is I'm a fan of Elizabeth Jean-Pierre. I'm a fan. Now, I won't be the head of her fan club because there's amazing people that she's touched more and more recently, but I'm definitely a fan. I'm part of that fan club. And you read a short bit of what she's been able to address in her career. We both met, quite a while ago at the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, now called Latino Justice, PearlDEF. It was my first job out of school, and as I was probably leaving, you were coming in. I know we overlapped, but it was a short overlap. PearlDEF is an institution now in the Latinx community of New York, and years ago I got invited to come back to PearlDEF to head it up. And of course, I also immediately remember Elizabeth's email to me, telling me how happy she was that I got the job, and saying I should have gotten it 15 years before. So we've been exchanging, accolades by email or text. We have so many things in common. We have boys more or less the same age. Her young boy got into Yale. My young boy got into Cooper Union. We've been celebrating ever since. To get to a point where your own family's excelling because of everything that's going on in this country is really a wonderful place to be. I am a feature and a product and a proud member of the Affirmative Action Fan Club, being incredibly benefited by those programs as well. So I've known Elizabeth for quite some time, and it also just, as I researched for today, I just reminded myself of so many things that she's been able to do. In fact, I wasn't really sure until I reread it that you also worked on behalf of American Indians and Native Americans in the United States, especially the ones here in New York City and metropolitan area, in which she had to address issues about how Native members of our community were completely blown away by the U.S. judicial system and the justice system, and how that doesn't comport with how they deal with mediation and conflict resolution. But right now, Elizabeth has been doing some amazing work. I'm going to talk about this in more detail in a minute with Uprose. Brooklyn's in the house. Brooklyn? There you go. So Uprose, an incredible, long-standing community-based organization in the Latinx community, founded by Puerto Ricans in Brooklyn. And those of you who know the migration of Puerto Ricanos into New York should remember or know that it was Greenpoint, those areas, the Brooklyn neighborhoods, that were the first settlements of Puerto Ricans who came to this country. Many of us think that Puerto Ricans first went to El Barrio. When we called it El Barrio, it still is called El Barrio, obviously. But it's really Brooklyn that was the home of this migration way back when, and now that Uprose is here and has been here, it's a real testament. In fact, Elizabeth was at the helm of Uprose when it celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2016. 50 years of a community-based organization, which is an amazing testament to the people who support UpRose and the organization itself. That's just amazing. Through UpRose, she pushed for a waterfront park, made streets that were busy more pedestrian-friendly, helped industrial businesses become more environmentally aware, and started organizing around disaster issues and climate change for many, many years, trying to get the community ready for Sandy and post-Sandy. And then, of course, dealing with the issues that we talked about before, that Naomi talked about before with respect to Maria and Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. But she is also the co-chair of the National Climate Justice Alliance, which links about 70 communities coast to coast, including Puerto Rico and Guam, communities of low-income, mainly people of color living on the front line of climate change. Elizabeth's work has been amazing, from work at the city level for advocating for lead paint removal legislation, work at the state level for helping to pass Brownsfield legislation, and I'm talking about accomplishments that happened long before last year, and we are going to talk about what happened this past session in Albany in a minute on climate change. And beyond the city and the state arenas, I do remember an amazing phone call I had with Elizabeth when I was at Latino Justice, and she was asking me about the Jones Act, international admiralty law, and a whole bunch of other complicated questions about how we get Greenpeace, the ship, into international waters to try to deliver goods without running afoul of the worst thing that happened in Puerto Rico so many years since 1917, the Jones Act. So that was a fascinating conversation that only Elizabeth and I could have had, and that I was actually listening to because she's the expert. Again, impressive beyond in so many ways. Elizabeth also is an accomplished speaker, and she speaks seemingly everywhere. At a climate change rally, which for the Pope Francis's visit on the National Mall in Washington, at a White House Summit of Women and the Environment in 2013. I think it was last year, the year before, I saw photographs of you at Puerto Rico to a jam-packed audience. Was that at University of Puerto Rico or La Interamericana? At UPR? I mean, a jam-packed audience listening to Elizabeth and others speak about climate change and Maria. And at one point she spoke because she was the first woman of color to ever chair the Environmental Protection Agency's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And I want to quote what she said at that particular event, because I read a news report written by a pretty conservative right-wing columnist or commenter, or perhaps a radio host, who actually quoted Elizabeth because he was trying to warn the country that all Elizabeth is really interested in is wealth transfer, right? That's the boogeyman of taking money out of rich people's hands and giving it to people who need it. Because she says something as follows: communities that have historically been the reluctant hosts to the country's environmental burdens have endured the consequence of poor public health, housing, employment, and education inequities, to just name a few. This administration, by the way, I think that was the Obama administration we were talking about. It was not this administration. The Obama administration deserves praise for recognizing that these complex problems require a holistic approach. So that quote alone got her in hot water with some very conservative commentators who said that basically Elizabeth is a radical. And if that's a radical, then I'll take the radical any day, right, Elizabeth? So I want to end with another quote that was shared with me by a person that we know in common who also works on organizing urban communities for environmental justice work. And this is what she said of Elizabeth. Elizabeth is always making things happen that demonstrate that our people are both technical and thought leaders in facing and shaping the solutions around the climate crisis. Elizabeth is incredibly adept of speaking the technical jargon necessary to understand the complexities of climate change and environmental justice, incredibly adept at leading people towards recognition of the danger, incredibly adept at speaking to anyone whether they're legislators or people on the street, and incredibly skilled as a female, Latina, Puerto Rican woman of color, an amazing warrior, and a beautiful colleague of mine. Everybody, por favor, Elizabeth Yampier. So we're going to take a minute to put on our mics. We on?
Yeah, I'm on.
You on? I'm
Yes,
on.
Thank
Okay,
you. That was
great.
amazing.
Thank you. So how you feel today?
I didn't know what quotes you were.
Well, I got
about
more, I got
to
more.
that you were about to pull out and what they would say. But thank you so much for that.
No, I have more.
Thank you, and thank everyone. This is an amazing honor. I'm really, really moved by being in this space and being with Rose's family. It's very moving.
Thank you. So actually, I'm glad you said quotes because I have a couple of quotes. Elizabeth has an amazing way to coin a phrase and turn things into very quotable, small tidbits. You're very good at this. You must have been doing this before Twitter was invented, right?
You have to be brief, and you need to be able to reach people's hearts and minds.
There you go. Well, you definitely do that. So I want to read something that was quoted in a wonderful piece in the Times that profiled you. This country was built on taking and pushing people out, and this is a continuation of that. Their ads always talk about the pioneer spirit. We call it the new colonization, and there's nothing innovative about colonizing. You remember what that was?
I do, because when we started talking about climate change, one of the big challenges that we had was also a climate movement that is extractive and colonizing. And we are descendants of slavery, we're descendants of colonization, and that's the entire history. It's built into the fabric, into the cells of how we make decisions about how we build community, even how we share or don't share power. So I think that was David Gonzalez.
Yes,
Oh,
David
the New York
Gonzalez was
Times?
following you.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a few years ago.
No, it was great. I mean, I wrote you back. I wrote you immediately. Say that I couldn't believe that you got white privilege and colonization in the same article. Say, wow, that's pretty
Puerto
good.
Rican.
That was but David Gonzalez was actually profiling, I think, some specific events that were happening in Brooklyn. Was it a rail line, some kind of train line, or a surface train?
It was two things. The BQX, which is a streetcar, it's what I call the $2.5 billion choo-choo, that is basically funded and designed by developers along the Brooklyn-Queens corridor. And the attempt to rezone part of the industrial sector to make it possible for Industry City to take what should be an economic engine to build for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, and turning it into a high-end destination with retail and commercial end. It's in New York City's largest significant maritime industrial area. There's a meeting right now as we speak that my staff is at. We had an action just a few days ago. And it really is about challenging how developers come into space in the age of climate change. And so the fact that they can get away with taking the only real estate that we have in New York City and turn it into an opportunity to deepen greed and to prevent us from building for a climate future that's already here is big for us, because this significant maritime industrial area doesn't just exist here and all over New York City, but in different parts of the country, and those are the only spaces that we have to do that.
Right. In the article, you were quoted as calling it a displacement economy. And at one point, you mentioned that for 15 years, it took us in Brooklyn, that is, and us in your community, to get to this point. And now now we're supposed to lose it because of gentrification. What was what was the improvements that you were able to develop? So I think this article was written in 2016.
Yeah, so we were able to double the amount of open space, stop the siting of a 520 megawatt power plant that would have been the size of 3 football fields, expand the median because our elders told us they were like roadkill crossing the street. We just recently launched the first community-owned solar cooperative in the state of New York. We have been working on literally taking entire parts of the community off the grid. All of these amenities that struggling communities, poor communities, people of color have deserved for generations because they've been living in the midst of power plants, waste transfer stations. Just this morning, it was hard coming here today because my uncle died this morning. And I was able to come because the health issues that he had were the result of living in environmentally burdened communities. They're the same kinds of health issues that I have, right? Everything from a pulmonary embolism to just the series of attacks on his body, from not having access to healthy food, from the legacy of stress that comes with being poor and being a person of color, to being exposed to toxics and toxicants his entire life. So he passed this morning, and
What was his name?
Candido Jean-Pierre, and 75 years old.
Basta cancer.
Yes, Candido. So the reason I mention him is because we have always been solution-oriented, and what we've learned is that our solutions actually displace our community. That the minute that you green up a community, you make it environmentally healthier, that you reclaim spaces so that people who have literally not only suffering from asthma but other kinds of health issues, that the moment that you actually hook up the community, that you lose it to displacement. That it becomes attractive to other people who have access to second homes and other places where they could live. That the culture of how we navigate our way through community also changes. That all of a sudden our children can't play in the street and they have to keep their hands out when they walk into bodegas. I remember one Saturday afternoon I was getting ready to go shopping with my husband to do groceries, and I was listening to reggaeton, and it was loud. And this woman came over to me and she said, "You need to lower that." And I went, and I cranked it up. That was my little act of defiance on a Saturday morning, because it wasn't a Sunday night. It was a Saturday morning, and I was going shopping, and I needed that music to get through the day. But it may seem like a small thing, but it literally is. Every single aspect of how you navigate your way through space changes as a result of gentrification. And I think that displacement is an act of violence. I went to 5 schools in 8 years as a child because we were displaced when we were young. And I can tell you that it is very much an act of violence.
I was going to switch it to a different area of the country, but let's focus again on New York and New York State. You were able to play a major hand in having something positive being passed in Albany, which is, by the way, applause. Albany's not always a place where you find progressive change, and you refer to it as probably one of the most progressive climate change piece of state legislation in the country. So tell us, first of all, what it is and what it took. What did it take to get it done?
So a few things. First, this was a coalition effort, and a lot of the work that we do as part of a movement. Literally everything we do as part of a movement. We are in touch with each other all the time. We see each other more than we see our own families. Thank God I'm married to someone who's in the movement. Otherwise, I don't know, like 3 o'clock in the morning, we're like talking about waste transfer stations. So sexy, right? But a lot of the work that we do with each other. And the New York Renews is a coalition made up of over 200 members in the state of New York. And what we did was we came together to figure out how we were going to make New York State go 100% renewable by 2050. And we wanted to make sure that 40% of all the resources would go to frontline communities. And this is before there was a Green New Deal. This is before people were talking about that. We were talking about a just transition, which is language that comes out of the climate justice movement. And so the name was changed by the governor to the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. It's called the most aggressive climate legislation in the world, not just in New York, but in the world. We've got folks from all over the country meeting with us. Just this past week, I was in a meeting with 7 senators, U.S. senators. I can't even believe it. I had a protest the next day. I went from one meeting with U.S. senators to an action. The following day, I'm texting my mom, like, Mom, I got all these, I'm meeting with all these people. She's like, you got this. My mom has so much faith in me. But it became, it was not what we wanted, and the political moment was a lot of things lined up. It wasn't just that there were a lot of brilliant, hardworking people in the room that were working 18-hour days. It's that the IDC was challenged by DSA and the Working Families Party. Had they not been there at that time and had those people not been pushed out, I don't know that the legislation would have moved. So I have to be honest about that. It was really about the right timing, the right people working really hard, and having partners that made it possible for us to, the political moment was right to make that happen. So, so it's hard to take credit for that because there were so many people involved, and it was really a lot of strategic decision making that was involved in doing that. Important for you all to remember that you can spend your lifetime trying to develop a piece of legislation and it will die because it's not the right political moment.
That's true. So for a long time, the country was speaking about the Green New Deal, you know, and now we're talking about Ukraine and impeachment, right? So, but tell us, the law that was just passed, you just described in New York, how is it related to the Green New Deal? Does it push the same kind of values? How would you describe that?
So I would flip that and say that the Green New Deal pushes the values that that law has. A just transition, how many of you are familiar with just transition? So a just transition is an economic framework that comes out of the grassroots, the front lines, the people most impacted. It's about moving an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And it doesn't talk about just scale, it talks about local livable communities and economies of scale, because we believe the solutions are going to be not just scale, but an aggregate of a variety of scales. And the reason for that is that we know that climate change will disrupt not just governance, but it will disrupt the economy. And so part of that is also reclaiming traditions. How do you create cooperatives? How do you create community-owned solar? How do you engage in food justice? All the different things that people need to survive the changes that are coming, and those are different economies of scale. On a larger scale is this legislation that we call the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is basically moving New York State by 2050, I think it's 85%, because we didn't get everything that we wanted, like some protections for workers and frontline communities were weakened as a result. Really, I'm going to be honest, some of the big greens really gave us a hard time and continue to give us a hard time. Some of them are dinosaurs and they're living in the past and are afraid to jeopardize their political relationships and take risks. But what it always was a just transition. And so when Alexandria and the folks that have been working with her started talking about the Green New Deal, we immediately looked at what was being proposed. We met as a movement. We looked at what it meant for our communities all over the United States, whether it was Indian country, whether it was whether it was Alaska or Oregon, or whether it was our communities in Appalachia, and what did that mean? And what would the platform look like that could be integrated into that legislation that had taken off and had a life of its own? What could that look like? We had a meeting with her, and we brought climate justice leadership to the meeting. We asked that frontline communities be centered and that the just transition framework be centered in the Green New Deal. So it was very important to us that we not be erased by grass top organizations that were trying to create the solutions for us. So that happened. We were able to integrate that because the Green New Deal itself has a lot of language and a lot of thinking that is important in terms of how do we address infrastructure, how do we address jobs, right? Like we've spent a lot of time talking about moving people away from the extractive economy, and we haven't been able to win the hearts and minds of unions because you need to have something to take the place of the thing that you're taking away. And so what this does, it provides us with that opportunity, with the funding, with the resources to be able to start building for that climate future. and to give something to those folks that are having something taken away. One of the biggest challenges is that folks think that they're going to continue to work for the kinds of salaries and the kinds of that they have in the past, and climate change changes all that. Literally, people are going to have to get used to the idea that we're going to have to learn to live with what we need and not with what we want. That literally capitalism is killing the country, and that model of more is not going to sustain us. That's just going to change. But this Green New Deal, with the just transition at its heart and frontline communities at its heart, should be able to provide solutions for different kinds of communities at different scales. And the solutions can't be cookie cutter. It is very different if you're talking about mountaintop removal and if you're talking about coastal communities. The solutions are different everywhere.
I have another quote for you. I'm sure you'll recognize it. If it were 5,000 kittens, there would be an outrage. If it was 5,000 dogs, there would be an outrage. If it was 5,000 blonde-haired, blue-eyed women, there would be an outrage. So what was that about?
That close to 5,000 Puerto Ricans died and nobody cared. In 2013, it was 10,000 Filipinos, and nobody talks about that anymore. That when people of color die, our lives are not worth the same. I really believe that if 5,000, and by the way, I have 2 Chihuahuas, of course I do, at home that I freaking adore. But you know it's true that if 5,000 kittens were slaughtered, it would be all over the media. Everybody would be talking about it. It would be about animal rights. It would be about putting them in jail. But with Puerto Rico, the oldest colony on the face of the earth, the value of our lives wasn't the same. People were more interested in, was the money used properly? Did they really get the money? Are they really dying? Oh, the conversations were one that really diminish Puerto Ricans. And that's the history of Puerto Ricans both here in the United States and Puerto Ricans on the island. And so I had to make a comment that would shock, because I was angry. I'm still angry. I've been working on this my entire life, and then the comparisons that people make between one struggle and another, as if somehow we weren't all fighting, growing, and building at the intersection of all of them, right? You've been working on things like ICE, police misconduct, housing. All of that gets exacerbated by climate change. And in Puerto Rico, we saw a history of austerity and neglect hit by a Cat 5 hurricane. And in Puerto Rico, there are 23 Superfunds. Can you imagine 23 Superfunds in Rhode Island, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx? 23, right? 23 Superfunds means that there has been a history of environmental degradation in Puerto Rico that corporations can only get away with in a place like Puerto Rico. So when a Cat 5 hurricane hits a Superfund, it means that those toxics, those toxicants, all of those chemicals end up in the sand, in the soil, in the water, in the air, and we won't even know for years how many people have died as a result of Hurricane Maria. We won't even know. So there's the number that keeps changing every day. Sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher, but we will never know how many as a result of that. So I was trying to be provocative, because I felt like the lives of people deserve that. It's kind of like when you talk about police brutality, and you've got like a 15-year-old black child or someone like Sandra Bland killed, and then all of a sudden you've got a white kid walking into a church and killing everyone in the church, and everybody starts talking about their mental health issues. Right. With us, the value of our life has always been different, and at that number, I felt that number was so extreme that it just, I was just unnerved by the reaction. I expected, when we had an action at the United Nations, I expected lots of people, all the people who have had to deal with injustice, whose protests we have been at, because there isn't a single demonstration or protest and injustice in this country where you have not seen a Puerto Rican flag. That is our history to show up. It's true. It's our history to show up, and it's our history to show solidarity. As people of African and indigenous ancestry, we've always done that. I didn't see the same love being given back to us. Right. And I was upset about it. But I'm a little better now. But no, it was really hard. But
No, it had to be
yeah.
said.
You just like triggered me.
Of course. Well, let's stay on the trigger. So Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
You were quoted in Naomi Klein's book, The Battle of Paradise, I think it's called, as saying that it's impossible to talk about what happened in Puerto Rico, meaning Hurricane Maria. And by the way, it was Hurricane Maria after Hurricane Irma,
Right.
back to back. It's impossible to talk about what happened in Puerto Rico without talking about climate change. So how would you connect to the average Puerto Rican living in Puerto Rico the connection between climate change and the Category 5 hurricane that hit?
So the story of Puerto Rico repeats itself in a lot of different places, right? You see it in Alaska, where people can't hunt for walruses anymore. You've got this island, right, that has gone through generations of extraction, of austerity, of disaster capitalism, of exploitation. And it's that very thing, that history of extraction, that history of taking, that history of extracting our land and our bodies, right? That is now being hit by the consequence of that process, and that's climate change. Climate change is the child of extraction. It's the child of colonialism. It's the child of the U.S. history in Puerto Rico and U.S. history in Indian country. It's that history, and so yeah, but one of the really cool things when I was in PR that stunned me was like I remember the day my mom called crying. I never heard my mom cry before, and she said, "You've got to do everything possible to send money, make sure Puerto Rico is safe." And that's when we created the People to People Just Recovery and our Power PR. And that's when I called Greenpeace and said, I want the ship, I want the blimp, I want all your toys. I want to go Batman man on this thing. I want this to get this international attention. But when I got to PR, I thought I was prepared. I thought I was prepared emotionally. But what I saw, what I expected was despair, and what I saw were people taking care of each other, cooking, sharing food, sharing medicine. I saw like one story which I don't, maybe men don't understand, but like I was in Vieques, and I was in Vieques, and the horses were emaciated and the trees weren't green, and there was this woman putting out her clothes, and she had her hair curlers on. And I remember thinking, we're gonna be okay. Because she's like, I am not going out this way. Right. I'm going to take care of myself. And that, for me, may seem like a little thing, but it was like this thing that reflected hope for me. Like she was like, I'm gonna hook myself up, and maybe no one will see me, but I am going to take care of myself. And that, I don't know, little things like that just gave me tremendous joy.
By the way, you're right. I don't know anything about hair colors. Let me see. Let's talk about youth and the role of youth mobilization, leadership, from the perspective of UPROS. Like, you just organized the 7th annual People's Youth Summit, right?
The Climate Justice Youth Summit.
At the same time that the country's attention was on this amazing young woman from Europe called Greta, and which you all obviously work towards the same kind of goals. And tell all of us a bit about how you, because UPROS for me has always been intergenerational. You've had incredible opportunities to develop youth at the same time that you bring adults into that sphere. Why is it so important from a perspective of UPROS to work in that space?
Thank you for that question. So I've been at UPROS since 1996. I'm not the founder. You heard that the organization was over 50 years old. No, not the founder. I came in 1996, and when I came in, shortly after I started, this 12-year-old walked in with a lot of sass and attitude, and she says, "What do you do here?" And I remember smiling and said, fill up the place with young people, and she did. And she ended up going to Antarctica on a scientific expedition, and we sent 4 young people of color to Antarctica and 3 to the North Pole. We've held 7 Climate Justice Youth Summits. Our office is getting ready to move for the first time in over 20 years, and I was looking through flyers and old files yesterday, and I saw how our young people have been meaningfully engaged and part of the leadership of the organization since I started at UPROS. Community is intergenerational, and power has to be intergenerational. And so this idea of youth-led for us is and maybe it's because in frontline communities, whether it's indigenous folks or black folks, or people who come from the global south, our organizations are all intergenerational. Maybe that's just a cultural thing. But the idea of youth-led versus adult-led feels very extractive. It feels like it's driven by capitalism, competition, and this need to move to the front and make a name for yourself when power really needs to be like this. So on my board, for example, one of our young people just got a double master's from Cornell. He started with us when he was 14. And our lead climate justice organizer started with us when she was 12. And we are significantly intergenerational. You should Google the Climate Justice Youth Summit, the 7th, and you will read the articles written by BET, Teen Vogue, basically everyone who covered our young people for the summit. It's really important for a few reasons. One, not only is that competition and that tension between generations an Anglo-American construct that resembles the kind of competitive culture that we need to move away from, because we need to start creating a different culture of practice. But with Greta, what happened with Greta for us, and I don't want to join the bandwagon of people saying negative things about Greta, but think about how the global south and young people who were born and raised in communities where they don't have the privilege to go and fight but have to do it because their survival is at stake. Young people who are not supported by an international media machine to come on a boat from Europe to be iconic leaders for a movement, who were being invisibilized in the last few weeks. That was really important for us that not happen, because we're part of a continuum of leadership. All our movements have been led by young people of color, whether it's the civil rights movement, whether it's Standing Rock, whether it's Black Lives Matter, all of it, young people of color. And so to make them invisible and make it seem like movements are being led by young people who come from privilege, or to make our young people the poster children to other folks' agenda, for us as adults, that's unacceptable. And we won't let that happen. We are the first line of defense because they did that to our generation. And it also can't happen because by 2042, we will be the majority in this country at a time when climate change really will have had its way with us. And our people, our young people, need to be integrated into leadership right now and are part of leadership right now. And if you spoke to any of them, they come straight out of school, and if we're having a meeting, they walk right into the meeting. There isn't a youth program. We don't believe in youth programs. We think it's kind of paternalistic when you're saying, what do the young people think about this? The truth is that learning happens across the table, and power is built across the table from each other. I think that I am sharper and a better organizer because I work with young people, and I think they know how to read the room politically because they get to they get to work with me, because I've had lessons as a result of all the mistakes that I've made, and they don't have the time to make the mistakes that we've made. When young people are not integrated into power, their progress is slower. Their political progress, their ability to actually change things is slower. And so if we want them to work faster, and climate change demands that we move faster, we have to have intergenerational power. And it has to be frontline led. And that's hard for people. It's particularly hard for people of privilege, because one of the things I always say, and I'm often quoted, is that privilege is the biggest obstacle to climate change. It's the one thing people refuse to give up. And we're demanding that power and resources be shared, and that people create a culture of practice that resembles their values. Rhetoric is one thing, talking about anti-racism is another, but walking into a room and not being the first one to raise your hand when the room is full of young people of color, that's hard. That's hard if you've always been you've been used to that kind of entitlement. And we're demanding something else. And we're saying that climate change is not enough to understand the technology, to pass legislation, to talk about the Green New Deal. We're expecting more. There is, the Sunrise, for example. How many of you are members of Sunrise? Any of you? All right. So Sunrise, for example, when Sunrise emerged, the first conversation we had with Sunrise is, instead of helicoptering into communities that are doing the work and slowing us down, supplanting efforts, go into communities that need climate consciousness. Go to Kansas, go to West Texas, go to Wisconsin. If organizations do that, then the culture of practice is extractive. And so if you've got young people coming into your movement or into your work, and they are not learning a different way of being in community at school or at home, then the culture of your institution has to expose them to a different way of being if we're going to survive climate change. And that has to be baked into the culture of the organization. And it's easier to get more funding and get more shine if you run to the front, if you have access to media. The foundations love white youth leadership. And they love young people of color so that they can sprinkle them around like Skittles, right? And so it's really this charge that you have personally about what is right for you. What kind of organization do you want to be part of? How are you going to make sure that the culture of practice changes? We work with Big Greens all the time. And in those Big Greens, because they have resources and they have people that we love, every organization has them, right? And then there's the folks that have been there for a minute who just can't let go or change or evolve. But there are some young people at places like NRDC, Earth Justice, Sierra Club, that are changing the culture of practice in those institutions, that are following the Hermes principles of democratic organizing, not just tattooing them, but like literally following them, you know? So that is as necessary to address the disruption that climate change is going to cause in our communities and to our society as being able to move towards regenerative energy, whether it's renewable, whether it's solar, whether it's wind. And that is really hard because we've been conditioned to be a certain way with each other. We've been conditioned to be competitive instead of collaborative. In the climate justice movement, mostly led by women of color, I get so much joy out of rolling in to a meeting with badass women. I can either walk in by myself, that's one feeling, but rolling in with these women, for me, is everything. We need to be leaderful. And this is a society that always picks one iconic leader, and then they can take that leader out. So Greta is one iconic leader. She's just one. But a leaderful community, a leaderful society has people all over the place holding it down. And that's really, I think, what we need to be striving for. So I don't want to diss Greta because, you know, she's, I can't even imagine as a mother what she's being put through to be that one voice. But one voice is not enough. And her not being a voice from the global south, her being a Nordic child coming in on a boat from Europe, we're feeling a certain way about that. We're not loving that. Solutions have never come from Europe for us, you know? But I work with people who are part of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. I work with people who are in Honduras. I work with people who are in Mexico, who are all over the Americas and the Caribbean. And I can tell you honestly that all of those places have solutions. They're all leaderful. And that's the kind of leadership that I want to see. And I say intergenerational, so I'm talking slow, but I really feel like this is big for me. Not multi, I say inter. Inter implies that there is this relationship with each other, as opposed to multi, which is like we don't need to communicate with each other, or let's just bring young people in the room, or let's have a youth track when young people should be integrated into leadership. It doesn't threaten anything, it just makes us better. It makes us sharper. There is a particular perspective, a lens that people have from their generation that adds to the conversation and that elevates it. And so we have to change the language. We need to change the way we are and how we engage with each other. And we need to decolonize. You know, we've learned to be this way. And it's not easy, but we have to decolonize. Decolonizing means getting out of our comfort zone. And if you don't get out of your comfort zone, climate change is going to take you out of that comfort zone, whether you like it or not.
You know, years ago, you organized a rally. I think you called it Justice for Berta Cáceres. At a time when few people, even our own communities, knew who Berta Cáceres was. And it really reminded me of kind of like the mentors that in my own development. And I'm curious if you could just share with us for a second, you know, why did you do it? Well, who is she for the people who may not know? Why did you do it? And talk to us about some of your own mentors. Or the people who kind of like that you wanted to emulate, whether they were mentors formally or not.
Well, Berta was a leader of a climate justice movement in Honduras who was killed just a few years ago. And I remember the first day I met her, we were at the Environmental Grant Makers Association, and I was sitting at a table with her not knowing who she was and thinking, my God, this woman's freaking brilliant. And I was, every word that she said, I was like just absorbing it and the energy, like the spiritual energy. And then they called her up to go on stage. I was like, oh, wow. Blew me away. And I'm part of, Uprose is part of GGJ, which is, we're not just members of Climate Justice Alliance, we're also members of the Global Grassroots Justice Alliance. And they have been working with Berta for a while, and that's how I met her. I felt very much that our struggles are connected to each other, and that our responsibility, without ignoring place or the things that we feel passionate about, that solidarity and working with each other and sharing expertise and strategy and resources is tremendously important. And so she was really meaningful. My mentors, you'd be surprised, most of my mentors were Jewish men, because I was a mensch. And so, you know, I'll tell you about the women of color who are my mentors, but like, you know, Morton Stavis and Arthur Kanoy and Rhonda Copeland when I was a law student. And so as a litigator, those were my mentors. Sure. As a woman of African and indigenous ancestry, my mentor was Malta Moreno Vega. I come from Yoruba traditions. I was born into that. And my mom, you know, like when I was little, she said, you may have been born light-skinned with green eyes, but the ship stopped in the Caribbean on the way up. So people in North Carolina may be related to you, never forget that. So there was this understanding of race while I was growing up that didn't come from a spoken word or class or anything like that. I was born into that. And Malta, through being introduced to the African diaspora and to culture and the power of culture and the arts in creating community power, played a major transformative role in my life. And yeah, I've been really blessed to be around a lot of people who have answered my questions, taken time with me. I try to do the same. I think that that's really important. Sometimes we feel alone and we feel like we don't know, and just a conversation. Richie Perez, for example. Sure. I was with Latino Coalition Against Racial, for Racial Justice, and did a lot of police brutality organizing, and we were in our 20s when Richie was mentoring us. That's right. We were in our 20s when we met each other.
That's true.
Okay, we don't say how old we are now, but we were in our 20s then.
It's true.
It's been a minute. So Richie, I remember just sitting there for hours and listening to how he strategized, how he thought about media. And so it's possible for a small grassroots organization like Uprose to really use social media and use media as a way of amplifying a local message, right. And we've become quite good at it, but those early lessons about that came from Richie.
Good point.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one or two questions from me. I think we're supposed to open it up, but real quickly. So the person who occupies the White House just denies that this stuff is happening. So how do you deal with these people in power that just deny the science, deny the facts?
So I don't know if anybody follows me on Twitter, but every once in a while I get attacked and I just delete. I don't engage climate deniers. I don't engage patriarchs, and I don't engage racists. I decided that as someone who has approached elderhood, that
You did not say that.
Haven't we? No?
I'm in denial.
Okay. I don't know, man. I'm thinking that it comes with some props, with some advantages, right? Where I could get away with stuff that I could get away with before, and I'm totally about that. So, so those are entire three groups of people that I don't. With climate deniers, I think that there are some people who should, but for us in the climate justice movement, I feel like it slows us down. It's not like we're going to change the way they think. It's not like we're going to change their hearts. I think our responsibility is to build momentum and to build a groundswell around people who may be on the fence, people who may be disengaged, people who haven't been exposed to thinking about these things critically and how it affects their families and their lives and their future, connecting it to their children, which matters so much to people. And I feel that that's how we build the bigger we. We build the bigger we with people who are either part of movement spaces, and we're doing that, or people who just really haven't had the conversation about this. But the deniers have made a decision, and they are not supporting the science, and they waste our time. So I don't, and I had someone actually yell at me at a talk, and he said, "So you're just gonna like write people off?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, it's either them or us." And I'm not writing us off.
Got that right.
So they take up too much space and too much energy. I was at a college recently at Beloit, and Cheney was coming to visit the school. And 3 young people of color said to me, "What should we do? Should we organize? Should we protest? What do you think we should do?" And we're having dinner, and I said, "What if you organize an alternative event that took all the shine and all the attention and all the media and all the love to that event and acted like that didn't even happen?" Because if you go, you're not going to change his mind or their mind. You're going to be accused of violating their First Amendment rights, and they'll be right, and they'll get the high road, right? Or you could just take the entire campus to this other event. What if you did that? It'll be better for your soul, because this has got to be hurting you at so many different levels, because you feel like it's an assault on your existence. Have another event. And they were like, "We hadn't thought about that." I'm like, I spent a whole lot of time doing those protests that never went anywhere. And so what we can do is build community, build power, and that's what our focus, I think, has to be. So that's my response to climate deniers, just like, psst. What are you going to do?
So the Zulu proverb Ubuntu just talks about "I am because we are." Let's end with that. You're an amazing leader, but I know you, and I know that you will be the first to say that this didn't happen just because Elizabeth Jean-Pierre is a badass. You have people in your corner, people in your office, people at home.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is really leaderful. And literally, we are badasses. Like, we are. There is nothing that we could accomplish. None of this can be done by one person. Literally, my husband is a leader in the environmental justice movement.
¿Y se llama?
Eddie Bautista. He's the head of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. Of course, that's why I say he's talking about solid waste management at 4 a.m. Gotten legislation passed on Father's Day. I remember breaking night this year and breaking night when we passed the Brownfield legislation. You kind of have to marry into it, man, because otherwise you got no life. Because climate change is real. But seriously, I get to work with people in Detroit, in the Gulf South, in Connecticut, in Boston, in Philly, in Kentucky, in Kansas, in Texas, all over Texas, in California, all over California, in Alaska, in Oregon, in Seattle. Like, it is the epitome of arrogance for anybody to think that they could do this by themselves. And the other thing is that the best answers exist in the collective. And you can go into, this happens to me all the time. I walk into a meeting at Uprose, and I spent the night thinking about something, and I'm all excited, and I come in, and I sit at the table, and I think, this is what I think we got to do. And then some 15-year-old will say, "Well, Elizabeth, had you thought about this?" And I'll be like, "No. Okay, let's just do that." So this work has to be approached with an enormous amount of humility. It is big, it is complex, and the answers come from places you wouldn't expect. All of you have a formal education. And to be honest, the people who have the best answers never had the opportunity to. Those are the people who have always lived within their carbon footprint. Those are the people who have always reused, recycled, and repurposed. Those are the people who know how to fix things and how to make things. things that we forgot a long time ago. And so if you're not in community with people who have the answers, people who come from the global south, people who are the global majority, if you're not in community and you're not listening and following, you will fail. Because there's a lot of people who think they're the smartest cats in the room. And they basically have gotten us to where we are right now. And so it requires a lot of humility. You're in a meeting about rezoning, you're in a meeting about land use, you're in a meeting about whether or not we need public banks, and not listening to how folks in the ground think about these issues, and that shaping your way of thinking means that you will become part of this elite that will not be as useful as you could be. So it does require humility. We do very specific things that we would train to do, and those are necessary things. Come on, if you're a person of color and you went to college and you went to law school, you know how happy and proud your parents and your community is. You walk into a room and they want to hear you first because they're like, oh my God, she went to school, we want her to talk. You need to check your privilege and step back and listen and know that our job is to facilitate meaningful community engagement and not to supplant local leadership. So it is a hard thing to do, especially if you come from struggle like I do, but it is a necessary thing if you really are about solutions and you're about building power from the grassroots up. And all of you in this moment in time, in this particular historical moment we're living in, should be about that.
Elizabeth Jean-Pierre.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I understand we have opportunity to ask questions from the floor. If anybody has a question or a burning comment. Yes.
Hi.
Oh, there's a mic here, no? Oh, you got one there?
I can speak up, or this is mine. Great. Hi, my name's Ehab. I'm a 2L at the law school. Thank you so much for coming. So my question is about, I guess, what we do with the community building. I mean, we talk a lot about how it's important to build a community, but then how does the community express that power in a way that actually changes things? And it's especially difficult, I guess, with the climate question because that's so broad and not something that's as easily tackled at the local level. Not that anything that is being done is easy on any of these levels, but it's obviously, it's an issue that climate change is not only driven by capitalism and white supremacy, but it also drives it, and it can be very profitable. Last year, the last non-charter public school in New Orleans closed down. This is like following post-Hurricane Katrina. A lot of the kind of formerly public goods have been privatized, so the only public school left is the one run out of the juvenile detention center there. There are new exciting shipping routes opening up because the Arctic is melting. And so I guess when you have that community power, is it political lobbying and electoralism, or is there something else that is the way to express that power meaningfully?
So it looks like a lot of different things, and in New Orleans, the historical black communities that were there since slavery were pushed out by FEMA the way that Puerto Ricans are being pushed out, and everything's being privatized the way everything's being privatized in Puerto Rico, right? You've got land grabs and speculators and disaster capitalism, and so those communities were moved to Houston when then they were hit by Hurricane Harvey, right? Surrounded by petrochemical industries. So it looks like a lot of different things. So what I would say is that there is a coalition and a new group being created every minute. And the more melanin challenged it is, the more likelihood that it's going to get funded really well. So the thing to do is not to create a new organization, but to check out the landscape and see what's there and ask the question, what do you need? What is it that you need to address this complex issue? I think that people, what they call the nonprofit industrial complex is real. And so you've got a lot of big social servicey type organizations that don't know anything about how you do this, but see resources, see access to resources, and it never really benefits people on the ground. So I think you have to ask folks on the ground, what is it that you need? I talk a lot about frontline led and how we need to make sure that people speak for themselves, but there are groups that ask us, what do you need? DSA came and said, what do you need? Earthstrike asked us, what do you need? And we said, you know what we need? This is what we need, and this is how we work with each other. And we've been able to do amazing things because we have supporters that look like folks in this room that are not from our community, but help us build our capacity, help us have a bigger impact. And the first question they asked was what you need. We're not prideful like that. So if you're in New Orleans, you need to identify who are the groups that are doing the work. You'll come into a community and not even know what the drama is between those groups. You won't know if it's, like I was in a conference in New Orleans where there was a Latina that was saying, well, we're going to be bringing organizing to New Orleans. There's no organizing going on here. And I said, really? You're going to do that? I said, because, I got to tell you, when Katrina hit, the jobs went to Latinos that were brought in and not to the Black people who had suffered. And that created tensions between these two communities. That should have never happened. And really that kind of arrogance, because you're here now, organizing is going to happen. She's like, you must be Puerto Rican. I said, every day. Every day. We can't be doing this to each other. There are organizations that have been doing the work and don't have the capacity because Black-led organizations don't get the same share of resources. So you call them and you ask them, what do you need? Do you need somebody to help you to do research? Do you need somebody to help collect data, baseline data so that they actually know the level of toxicity after a hurricane? Do you need somebody who can do some GIS mapping? Do you need somebody who can look at the legal implications of climate change, which nobody has ever really done? Procurement policies, whatever it is, the legal system is not prepared for the impacts of climate change. So much for you to do, but it all starts with that question and knowing the landscape. Finding organizations that you trust to say, hey, there's these 3 organizations, which one do I approach? Because they may have beef with each other. And of course they have beef. You know why? Colonialism. It pits us against each other. We got people that are colonized, they'll take the money, they'll sell their community. That's the history of our people. So you got to ask that question. But you're needed and you're necessary, but it kind of starts like that. I hope that helped. Okay.
Anyone else?
I promise to be briefer.
I really like this conception of leaderful rather than having a singular leader. And I'm curious, when you're building that community and that organizing power, how do you address issues that are pervasive within every community, like anti-Black racism and patriarchy, like within the movement, so that you can, I think it's easy to say, like, X, Y, and Z, that community has these issues. It's much harder to be introspective and look and see how that's challenged within and how that limits the overall power of the movement. And so I'm just curious about how you simultaneously address the big issues of climate justice while being introspective and looking at like the internal dynamics within your organizing community.
Well, ours is a movement led by people of color. And so, and we don't think that it's our responsibility to deal with white supremacy. We think that's the responsibility of white folks to take that on. But when I'm in spaces where there's somebody missing, I name that. So when we were organizing the Frontline Climate Strike at the Climate Justice Youth Summit, all of a sudden it was a wall of brown bodies. And I was like, where are the Black people? No, we can't move. We can't move. Literally, we need to be able to be intentional about making sure that all our people are at the table. And so for me, in terms of my personal role in leadership on a national level, it's been really important to me that there is this fetishizing that people do with people. So everybody assumes that it's just Native Americans that should have an opinion about Mother Earth. There's this conversation about immigration, and people say that this country started with immigration, that immigrants built this country, and I'm like, no, that didn't happen. This is a country that belonged to indigenous people. It was built by black people, and immigrants have sustained it. And don't write people out of the narrative. That conversation, that statement has gotten me to lose 3 grants. 3 grants, because no one would take my back or defend me. And I'm light-skinned, right? But I can't deny my grandfather's. My grandfather was Haitian, right? And I can't deny, I'm the lightest skinned one at home. But it's my responsibility, if I'm in a space where someone else isn't, to call the question and to name it. And how we are safe is by taking each other's backs. So if I'm in that space and I'm saying that, then you got to take my back and say, I agree with Elizabeth, because then people have courage. But we have to have the courage to change things and to name them if that's the kind of life we want to live and that's the kind of society we want to have. So I personally do that, and it has cost me. It has cost my organization, and I'm willing to keep doing it, But we, those of us who do that, can't do that by ourselves. Literally, people are terrified it's going to affect their career, it's going to affect their funding, and they don't call the question. So patriarchy, I had a young man from my organization come up to me about 6 months ago. He was very serious, about 19 years old, looking down. I said, what's wrong? He's like, I think I may be patriarchal. And I said to him, wow, that is a question and an internal amount of work that puts you way ahead of most men. Big ups to you, and yes, you are. Yes, you are, but you're working on it. And so I hugged him. So yeah, it can be done in a very loving way, because we really think about what happens to young men. Young men are expected to be not patriarchal, but no one ever trained them not to be. Their entire lives, everything they've been exposed to, everything they've learned, it's been reinforced at home, and then all of a sudden, we expect them to be a certain way without ever having given them an opportunity to unlearn that mess and let them be full human beings, right? You hear programs for girls, and that's not me saying your girls are okay, because no, right? But my point is that we need to approach this with love, and we need to be able to create the spaces for people to evolve and grow into their humanity, because we've all been conditioned to be a certain way and to treat each other a certain way. And so if you've learned something your entire way, and all of a sudden people saying you're patriarchal, it's scary to even say it, because you're like, you don't know how to be or who to be. We need to be able to create those spaces to bring that in. We need to engage in transformation and self-transformation. And all of this has something to do with climate change. I swear it does. It does. Because, when you imagine the future in a post-climate change world, think of how dangerous it can be if racism is still a thing, if patriarchy is still a thing. It is frightening. So all that work, all that unpacking, that stuff is part of the work that has to happen now if you're thinking about climate change. We all know this. I think so. I feel it.
Anyone else?
That's because I promised to be brief, and I wasn't. I broke my promise. Nobody? All the way in the back.
Oh, back there.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm a 1L at the law school. Also wanted to thank you so much for coming to speak to us. I'm kind of a weird community. Like, I'm trying to learn really, really hard. Like, I want to untrain myself of a lot of the stuff I've grown up hearing and just kind of been steeped in a capitalist patriarchal society. So I was trying to learn more about the neighborhood where I live, which is Prospect Heights, and I was looking up who my community board representative was, and he is a Jamaican hardcore Trump supporter, which was not at all what I expected. It kind of just hit me in the face a bit, and I'd had this, and you look at the election data, and the area voted for Clinton, but somehow he's the community representative, on a board that makes important zoning decisions. Anyway, what I'm getting at is I want to listen to the communities around me who are most affected by issues of climate change and mass incarceration and all of this. But, what happens when you listen to a community and it tells you something that conflicts with some other value you hold? There are parts of the city that, homophobia is still a really big problem and are extremely patriarchal. So I hear that, and I'm not going to listen to that message, but there are other messages I clearly need to listen to. So I'm sorry, I know this is a really complicated kind of abstract question, but what do you do when something you hold really dear, like a value, when do you know if that's conflicting rightly or wrongly with what you're hearing on the ground from people and what they say they want?
So I can give you two examples. One is around 2000. About 1/3 of our young people were Palestinian, and they were making comments about the Jewish community. And what I did was I brought my Jewish friends in who do social justice work and have been doing it their whole lives. We broke bread, they hung out with them. They were like, I really like those people. I'm like, they're Jewish. I said, you may want to separate Zionism from that. You may want to learn the difference. They were young, 15, 16 years old, though amazingly sophisticated politically. I wanted them to feel safe, and I wanted them to be able to speak their mind, but I wanted them to see the distinction. And they changed the way they talked about it. And then we reached out to JFRIJ, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and we did a thing together. That was one thing. About 10 years ago, there was a lot of, with our young people, a lot of homophobic comments. And so what I did was I went downstairs and I bought them pizza, and I was gonna have a conversation with them, and I started talking about my uncle and about my first time I think that I decided I was gonna be an activist. And I told them that when I was about 5 years old, my black, gay, Puerto Rican uncle, who taught me how to put on makeup and would put bows around me and teach me how to do a catwalk, my black uncle, who was queer, who I adored, was taking me home when a bunch of kids started throwing rocks at him. And I put my little body in front of him to protect him. And I swore that I would never let that happen to anybody. And they started asking me questions about my uncle, and I answered all the questions about who he was and the life he lived and how he died from complications from AIDS, without ever telling them that I knew that they were making these comments. And I just told them my story. It was a personal story, it was real. They loved me, so I knew that they would care about how I felt. And that stopped. And then 1 year, one of our lead youth organizers was gay, and we had about 250 young people that were part of a baseball team, and the father, who was the lead coach, said that unless I got rid of him as the youth organizer, that he wasn't bringing his 250 young people back. And I said, don't. Then he came back. I said, I'm sorry. I said, okay, we're good. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you never know what exactly causes people to think that way, but there are ways of bringing them into your experience without Spike Leeing them, beating them on the head with your reality. Some people need to be Spike Lee'd, but it depends, right? It depends on who your audience is, and it depends. It's got to be a person. There are different ways of doing it, But in every instance where that situation comes up, where my values, my core justice values get challenged, I try to do it that way. And then there are people who are definitely Spike Lee. But, you know, I had this elder at the community board 7, when I first started at Upros, who grabbed my arm, put her finger in my face and said, "You people." I said, "What people?" She says, "You people." I said, "Yeah, leadership looks like me now." Oh my God. But you know what? I was young. I wouldn't deal with that the same way. I spent 10 years feeding her. Every time I saw her, I'd give her something to eat. And now she hugs me and kisses me every time she sees me. So, you know, I don't know if she remembers that I was nasty right back to her. Because at that moment, she represented the generation that had made my mom's life impossible. She represented that generation that put my family through hell. And I'm talking hell, right? The lessons that I learned about brutality. You know, my mom was held down by a teacher, a white teacher, so that a student could hit her when she was in grade school. My uncle, the uncle I was talking about, beaten by Italians with what they called garrison belts, beaten until they put him in a mental institution. I have lots of those stories and I have a lot of rage in me. So even controlling it is my just trying to build the bigger we and trying to get people to that place where we engage in mutual and self-transformation. And I follow those Hermes principles, but it means making sacrifices, sometimes overeating, carving out, because you're like, wow, I need some carbs right now. So I'm not gonna say it's easy, it's not, but it really is what your commitment is to transformation.
Thank you. Is Naomi here? There she is.
Did we lose Naomi? Sorry.
No, there she is.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.